is in the heart of Dublin 8, in the area known as the Liberties. It's an old converted distillery, and the sculpture department is in the old building, which is the Granary building, which is mostly where the School of Fine Art and School of Fashion, the Department of Fashion is. So we're on the ground floor, and it's quite a distinctive space. It actually has a real kind of atmosphere, this campus, and that's quite important, I suppose, for coming to visit it. And it's something that there was a couple of years ago talk about moving the campus out to UCD, and actually I was before my time here in NCAD, but there was a lot of students very upset about it, because actually there's a lot of character to the space. And one of the things about sculpture is understanding the character of a space and understanding the sort of physicality of the surroundings. So it's quite a sculptural campus in that there's these very large stills, which is where they would have made the whiskey. That's where distilling comes from. There's 2 huge copper stills that are really like the remnants of an industrial era, you know, of the scale. Like up the road is the Guinness's, the whole Guinness's complex, Diageo now complex. You can see like the manufacturing of making alcohol is huge. So for us, the building has a real quite an important quality to it. So if you get a chance, trying to get to visit the campus, I know restrictions and all of that, but it is a sense of if there are events on, or you know, you want to come in and we could arrange for a visit, then that would be something just to give a sense of the campus. But you can kind of look into the archway, and you can look into other areas, and I suppose you go with Google Maps and have a look at it. But it is quite a distinctive campus. That's one thing to say. So we're on the ground floor, and that's possibly because from traditionally there was a lot of materials used in sculpture. So we get materials delivered, and then we have to bring it into the ground floor. So I'm going to show you some images of the department, and I'm going to show images of some of the work. So I'm going to share my screen and bring this up here, share. And now you see this, and now I make this full screen, and then I go to run my show. And now, can everybody, maybe you can just tell me in the chat, or you can tell me through voice, I don't mind. Are we able to see the full screen? In other words, that the screen is not just the window panes, but actually the full screen. It says Sculpture and Expanded Practice, AD 101, AD 204. Is that, can someone give me a thumbs up there with their signaling if they want to?
Yeah, you're able to see the whole screen.
Oh, thanks so much, Sarah Jane. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a kind of a panorama shot of the department, which kind of does funny things and kind of making it look bigger and also making it look smaller. In the very corner over here is where I'm speaking from, in this room and here. There's the nice bright windows. And this is set up for work that's been shown in a degree show. So I'll go to the next slide. So these are our workshops. So we have workshops in wood fabrication, and we have a workshop in metal fabrication. We have a workshop that does clay and plaster and other kind of wet materials. And we also have a workshop around digital materials. So these are quite big workshops to facilitate a large number of students working, and the different types of machines need to have health and safety kind of space around them for which to use them. And so yes, so part of sculpture is actually having fun with materials and working with very quite physical materials. Students there are wearing welding helmets, because in order to protect yourself when you weld, you're using hot metal. It's very it's extraordinarily hot because it can melt metal, and you need to protect your eyes. So that's a kind of a sense of some of the spaces, and then working with the machines. So if you've done woodwork in school, you'd be familiar. If you've done metal work, or you know, even if you have a sense of kind of technical drawings and how to build things from drawings, that's important because you need some measurements, and you need to have a sense of, before you use a lot of materials, obviously you don't want to waste them. And we'd be quite conscious now of trying to use recyclable materials, of trying to be quite aware of materials and material wastes, and even just the cost and the sort of carbon footprint. So you can do very well with scavenging materials in the sculpture department, and that's something to think about. Reusing, of course, is the idea. I'm doing a workshop tomorrow, and we're going to use it all with recycled materials. So that is important, and it's important obviously because cost as well. This is just like a workshop we did around looking at artist books, which is a thing that we're interested in the department with, because books are very physical things. You can open them up and you can make kind of shapes, and we've been using them now since lockdown actually as a way to send out work and for students and artists to make work through bookworks, and that's an interesting kind of area to think about. The sort of, again, the physicality, anything that's kind of three-dimensional, physical, has this kind of extra material quality. You can hold it. The phrase for that is haptic. You can touch it. So these are some work from our students in first year. So in the structure of NCAD, you come to NCAD either on your fine art course through the CAO or through the common entry route. And then in the first term, or we call them trimesters, you would be sharing with all the students. And then in the second trimester, you make a choice to come into different departments. So you get started getting streamed, and you get to test different departments and see which one you'd like. So these are students who've done work in this first time coming to the Department of Sculpture and trying out some work. And you can see that from the beginning, they're kind of interested in arranging of things in space, and that's one of the reasons why they might choose to do sculpture. So it's kind of like a little bit quite architectural, some of this work, playful, like colors and stuff. This was at the other end. This is a student who's leaving, whose work has been made. It's a huge cast work. So this was made out of resin fiberglass, and it's 3 enormous feet. The student Megan had actually a foot phobia, but so she decided she'd try to make something about her phobia. So this really is a kind of a nightmare dream image that she had of giant feet, spotted feet. So it's a little bit like Gulliver or something to have somebody's feet this big, but there were 3 of them, and they rotated in space. And again, this was part of her presentation, and the work was called Touch and Tremble, Touch, Taste and Tremble. So again, making a large scale work like that requires quite, I mean, they were they're about the size of a small car. Okay, and then for the next slide. Yeah. And this work here by David was also quite an interesting work in that it shows a little bit of kind of process of thinking about materials. So he experimented with different materials using gelatin, which is a kind of organic material. And he cast the gun and he cast the spoon. He made the spoon with a little airplane on it. So he cast it in gelatin with silver. And then it is under this standard kind of builder's lamp. You can get them in Chadwick's, for the word's going in my head for a second. But anyway, it's the brightness of these lamps are actually very warm. So the work is melting over time and disintegrating. So the journey of the gun turns into the spoon. And it looks a little bit like, kind of CSI or sort of crime scene. So it's quite a nice project just to talk about materials. Materials don't have to be static. The idea of over the length of the show, with the lights, the arc lights, shining down on the work, it actually started to disintegrate as a kind of a story in and of itself. Another show with lights. This is in an underpass underneath a road, a subway. When we went on a field trip, which before COVID we were able to do, and we hope to be able to do again. But it's a very nice thing for the department to go and visit big sculpture shows. And there's a really great sculpture show which happens in the city of Munster, which is in the western side of Germany there, over near the Dutch border. And it has a very famous sculpture project and running it for many, many years. And so we went there as a class to have a look at some of the work that was all sited around the city. That's what makes it so interesting in a way for sculpture, is that it connects with public art, as you probably know, and that work is not just in a gallery or in a room. In fact, it takes up lots of different spaces, and it's often a real challenge for artists to find these spaces, like an underpass, like a subway, often disused spaces or spaces you think that'd be a very interesting place to take the audience to, and that's part of sculpture. So sculpture is distinct, in a sense, it's distinct from pictorial. So there are 2 words, sculptural and pictorial. And sculpture it's this spatial understanding. You can walk around the sculpture, and in a way it was criticized way back in the day of like Plato and ancient Greece. Sculpture was criticized, and painting was more truthful because there was only one way to look at it. There was just flat on the wall and you looked at it from one perspective. Whereas sculpture was seen to be uncertain because you couldn't say which is the right way to look at it. Oh, apologies for that. And so you couldn't say which way would be the right way to see it because you're going around completely. So sculpture is also from touch and from gesture, like many arts, like material, anything working with fabric, for example. But it also has an engagement with architecture and the living environment. So it could be sculpture can be out in forests, and it can be in high dense urban environments like Dublin 8. And so it's also very interesting to see that all the materials that we have, particularly now we're more environmentally aware, is to see where does steel come from? You know, where do these chemicals come from? How do they get made? You know, what are the mines? How is it extracted? You know, where does gold and silver come from? How rare are some of these materials? You know, how do I get a process like plaster? Where does it come from? Where does limestone come from? That is quite interesting to see how they are sort of shaped. There's nothing kind of neutral about them. They're actually all shaped by social economic forces. And a lot of students would be interested in that. But here's something in its natural environment that we can kind of go, okay, that's sculpted by the sea and over millions of years to, and the way in which we can see the sediment of the planet. And it's so fascinating, you know, underneath hard rock is maybe another sea as well. So we live on this extraordinary object, which has been sculpted by the universe and by the forces in the universe, which makes it round, of course, which makes it spherical because of the forces in the universe. And you know, we're bombarded with light and photons, and just now I think they're sending a rocket. I heard in the news today they're sending a rocket to try to knock an asteroid, see if they can budge an asteroid from its route, that it doesn't come and hit us. So we're in a kind of a shooting gallery, quite physical world. And I like this image just to say there's lots of sculptures already ready-made around our coastline. So in a way, sculpture is this relationship, and it's famously put in this, it's not landscape and it's not architecture. It's defined by being neither one of these things. And here's a work that a student on our course made very early during the, you know, partial lockdown, the 7th, and in May 2021, May this year, up at 7 a.m. actually to make this work in the skate park in Lefanu Park in Ballyfermot. And then you can see there was, you know, some skateboarding. So it's interacting with what is the use there of this quite extraordinary, it's quite an extraordinary sculptural space. The kind of dipping bowl. I don't know if any of you are skaters, but you know, it's about a physical thing about how to get your body to go off the rim and to go down into this bowl, and it's all made out of beautiful concrete. So this kind of idea of space and under the sky was what overground under sky. And so Chloe made this work with this fabric, this net curtain material that she actually bought in Ballyfermot, which is an image of birds, and then she put this text around the inside, written in chalk, so it was not going to last. Obviously, the rain would come and wash it away. And then she brought it back into our studios and then hung it up and turned into a kind of a different idea as a kind of a screen, capturing the light, holding the light, having this tension in it. And then she brought it out to the gardens of Imma and then rearranged it again. So it's a very large piece of fabric, but it suddenly starts to look like a bit of a spaceship here. It looks like whatever Han Solo's ship. Yeah, it has a funny kind of quality to it. This idea about changing the space, changing the context. And of course, this garden is a very sculptural garden. Look at the way those bushes and those trees are turned into spheres. So yeah, and then working in nature is something that quite a few students have done for their final years. This is Deborah Corcoran's work, where she built this structure, which was both functional for the farm that she lives on, for cattle, but also as a space where she started to have some workshops in. And this idea about dual purpose or placing something in a field, in the corner of a field, it's quite different from I need to go to a museum or a gallery to make my work. I'm making my work out in this context around this setting. So from some students in first year, we also would encourage quite a few students who come to sculpture who are interested in their bodies, in the physicality of their bodies, and that becomes performance art, which you may have heard of, where students are actively kind of participating, and the physicality of their bodies is the kind of vehicle for how the work could be made. So Violetta's work was actually made out of all these packages with different types of earth in them that she collected these samples, and it was a box, and she could crumple that whole thing up and become the box. So she kind of was like an inanimate box, and then she would stand up and walk around and then settle like a tortoise again and become the box. So there's quite an interesting relationship that you can build being in a space and then moving around that space. And Lauren's work was then about people to write onto her body. And so both of them went on through our course. Lauren, through lockdown, made a really strong work in Kilmainham Jail, which you may know was closed during lockdown. And there's no tourists and all these sites, but she actually asked them, could they open it for her so she could come to make these performance works? And she was very interested in women and the containment of women in the prison, because it's a famous prison for women revolutionaries. And Violetta ended up making work in her apartment because she was limited to what she could do and where she could go. So she made this very curious rotating work, which would make her kind of spin. And again, quite a bit of woodwork and sort of thinking about it, but again, a performative work where she made this video, and she did some live work as well. She got an invited audience to come, and she was able to spin around on this structure so that her feet would barely touch the ground. So it's kind of like being a puppet, trapped in this kind of space and constantly rotating. And yeah, it was very, very, very interesting to see how responding to that space, unique to that space. But it's not like I go to a museum or a gallery to make it. I make it in my own apartment. Other students have worked outdoors because the outdoors is very interesting in Ireland. It's very interesting spaces. Heather's work here was made down in the Curragh of Kildare, where she researched a group of women who used to live outside the big army barracks there in the Curragh. They were called the Wrens, and they were really a group of women who were quite persecuted, who ended up living kind of very rough and homeless in the bushes. And she wanted to tell that story as about a kind of positive story for women, about how the women defended each other, stuck together, and built a new kind of a different society. And Gary's work was actually in the port of Drogheda, where he worked with the local brass band, and he made a composition for them based on the traffic that went in and out of the port in the 19th century. So obviously it was once a very busy port, and now it's a very quiet port. And he wanted that idea between busy and quiet turned into music. So again, sound work was something. We have a digital studio, and sound is an area we're very interested in, sound-filled spaces. And this is last is just some of the work that I've made. So these are works in Kilmainham Jail, like we saw earlier with Lauren's work, where this puissance jump, this jump that's built for the RDS horse show, and it ended up being an execution wall, where these special effects, the walls show that where the bullets hit it. And then another work that I've made using in a park this is in Kilkenny, using a carousel, an old Victorian carousel, and quite a kind of long story, quite a theatrical work as well. So that's just showing taking the work out is something that's kind of popular within the sculpture department. That's what I wanted to show you. And then hopefully you have some questions that you might want to ask me about that or about anything in relation to sculpture. Thank you. You can put them in the chat if you don't feel like talking, if you don't feel like putting them on your, you can ask a question in the chat. And if you don't have any questions, that's quite all right too. Yeah. Yeah, very, very hard. Duncan, I completely sympathize there. So, do you ever work large installations with class? First of all, we've got to look at Duncan's one. So yes, sculpture is very physical. We kept NCAD has kept open. We're very safety cautious, but we have kept open, and the sculpture department has kept open through a lot of the lockdown. And our second years were one of the only second year groups that came back, precisely because to learn through sculpture, you have to learn with materials. So this decision, this day, is not my decision. It's not from, but I understand how the college is working, because there's a lot of caution now to keep the college open and not to have increased risks. So the decision was made, yeah, to do this. But I totally sympathize. This is a very unusual situation we're in. There's nothing normal about this. It's not the way we want it to be. Did you ever work with large installations of glass? No, I never worked. I personally never worked with, and I have some students have worked with glass. Tricky material and very, very heavy and challenging. So yes, some interesting ideas. We have a glass department here, which is in, AMC, Applied Media. But it is interesting to see glass as a structure. It's very good for holding projections on. It has lots of capacities, actually. Yeah. The next one is, I'm just wondering if this course teaches how to use different mediums. Well, yeah. So our courses were workshop based. You would do your week is like, you'd have workshops, you'd have some seminars, you have studio time where you have tutorials with staff, and you're answering a project brief. So you go through quite a lot of projects. And as you progress into your final year, you would then be doing more self-directed projects. You'd be kind of writing your own project. You'd be developing your own way that you would like to work. So, but yeah, we do a lot of projects. We do a lot of group work, quite a group work projects, because sculpture actually requires a lot of people. If you're going to work in sculpture materials when you graduate, you will be connected with a lot of suppliers, other technicians, other artists, arts organizations. If you look at any commission, public commission, there's so many people, engineers, risk assessments, there's so many people, roads authorities, so many people to work with. Much appreciated. Okay, yeah. And did you ever do woodwork or metalwork before? Do you need? Oh no, not at all. Not at all. No. But you might just have an interest in, you might be interested in Minecraft. You might be interested in building spaces. There's kind of Roblox is a great, online building space. So you might just have that sense, I actually quite like architecture. So if you like architecture, that's something that you'd be saying, I like going to buildings. I'm interested in going to an old church and see what's inside it. I like stonework just to look at it. But no, we would work on helping you with develop those skills, but if you have them, that's great, but we don't presume on that. And our sculpture is always in such an art school. No, they don't have to be, no, but tends to be, that is a very good question. Why is scale so important? Why sometimes painting might be a little bit domestic. People do make smaller scale sculptures, yes, they do. But there's something about it now that this phrase, not landscape and not architecture, it has just become an awful lot bigger. Yeah, it's good. That's a good question. Little like cinema is big and TV is small. So TV is like, or people have their phones, tiny TVs. But when you go to the cinema, you want to see something big. And there has been that quality within architecture and within sculpture. You can see that houses just got bigger all the time. I mean, it's very hard that people are actually buying. I love this tiny house movement, but some people, so few houses are built small scale, like in the past. So there's just, super size me or something. I don't know why that is. Would 3D modeling be involved? 3D modeling. Yeah, well, there's a famous word in sculpture is making a maquette and making a model. Making a model is really helpful. You can make a digital model and make it in SketchUp and make it in Blender, which is what we'd also work with. So there are digital ways quite quickly you can do it. Then they take more skill to get more refined with the tools. But to make a model is really important, because you're going to spend a lot of money on sculpture. It's a little bit more expensive than, I'm just going to use my markers and a piece of paper. You've got to think about the materials. Where am I going to get them? How is it going to work? And this idea of the model, you start to see things in the round. You start to turn it around. You start to really put it together. So loads of architects work with models. That's how they do it. Would you recommend to reach out to NCAD students? Would I recommend to reach out to NCAD students? Not sure what that question means. So if you want to just put in another sentence there to say what that means. Are drawing skills very important? Yeah, I mean, I think that's for your portfolio. I think drawing skills are a really good way. When I look at portfolio, many people can't really submit sculptures because they can be big or they could be heavy and they don't want to put them in portfolio. You take a photograph of them from these different points of view, of course, or you could show some things you might have built in record a video of what you've done on Roblox or what you've done in Minecraft. So yeah, but drawing is very important. It's very important for being an artist. At the end of the day, when you graduate, you know, yes, you could call yourself a sculptor, but most people just call themselves artists, and they can have a wide range of skills. But I would think drawing is an important skill. It's an important thinking tool, essentially. It helps you think, like making a model. You're thinking then before you commit. It's not just the product. Oh, I make it and it has to be like this. It's evolution and developmental. That's the creative process. You change things, you modify things, and even when you're finished, you're never usually that happy. You're always thinking, God, I could have done that better. Or but you have to sort of say goodbye to work and say that's what it is. Would it be a good idea to try to talk to students in NCAD now before you get in? Oh, okay. Yes, great. Of course, from the horse's mouth, talk to students. You will get a much better idea from talking to students. You know, you get a good idea from me, but you're going to get a really good idea from talking to students, and that's very important. And our students will be, I would say, great ambassadors for the course. Thanks very much. Oh yeah, thank you, Sinead, as well. Thanks for attending. So some people are moving on. Maybe it is exactly 4:30. So I would just say thank you, and if you have any more questions, I'll put my email in the chat there, and I also can find out on the website. Okay. Yeah, there you go. handbe@staff.ncad.eu. Thank you, Cecilia. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Alana. Thanks, Susie. Okay. And if nobody else has any more things, let's hope we you know, this thing changes and we get out of this lockdown and get to see things in the real. And great, the museums are still open and galleries, so get to go to see work. Very important if you get to go to see work in the museums. Okay. Right. Back on the picture. Okay, guys, unless anyone's got any questions, I'm going to close this session. Once again, thanks for coming to our slightly odd virtual open day.